Frequently asked questions regarding comparing federal and state legislative branches of government. First, where's the Congress established in law? The Constitution of the United States spells out the authority of Congress to make laws in Article 1, Sections 1 through 10. Is the power of Congress limited? Congress's authority cannot conflict with the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. The 10th Amendment provides the powers not delegated to the United States nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Where is the California legislature established in law? The California Constitution in Article 4, as well as the state's government code in sections 9,000 to 10606, establish the legislature as well as procedures by which legislation is proposed, considered, and adopted at the state level. Do political parties play a role in the legislative branch of our government? In both Congress and the legislature, the political parties and the party leaders dictate much of the legislative process, as well as the ultimate outcome of legislation. This is due to the fact that the majority party enjoys a majority of members on the committees, thus generally ensuring they control the fate of legislation, and of course on the floors, because the vast majority of bills require a simple majority vote for passage. How does the U.S. Congress conduct its business? Both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives use an elaborate system of committees and subcommittees to consider legislation as well as the federal budget. The Senate has about 16 standing committees and nearly 100 subcommittees, while the U.S. House has roughly 22 standing committees and nearly 150 subcommittees. These committees and subcommittees are where legislation is heard, amended, debated, passed on the floor, or passed to the floor, or ultimately held in the committee. How are legislative committee members selected in Congress? Well, given the size of Congress with 100 senators and 435 representatives, there's a heavy reliance on seniority and expertise of members in determining committee membership. The selection of committee and subcommittee chairs is determined by the party leaders, and the California legislature relies less on this seniority approach, but certainly takes into account the expertise and political needs of its members to determine committee composition. What are the vote requirements in Congress? A majority vote is required for most actions of the U.S. House and Senate, as well as its committees and subcommittees. U.S. House and Senate rules regarding debate and bringing matters to a floor vote often require supermajority votes, usually two-thirds or three-fifths. The most prominent example occurs when the U.S. Senate has rules providing for a debate that is virtually unlimited unless it is stopped. How are the federal and state budgets determined by the legislative branch of government? Through the annual federal and state budgets, Congress and the legislature can provide or remove funding and direct executive branch agency activities through budget control language. And Congress can direct one of its many control agencies, like the General Accounting Office, Congressional Budget Office, or committees themselves. And the legislature can do the same through the Legislative Analyst Office, State Auditor, or legislative committees in order to investigate the agency's actions to regulate or implement laws enacted by the legislature. How does the legislature consider legislation? Both the California Senate and Assembly use a committee system like Congress. The various committees, currently 22 standing committees in the Senate and 32 standing committees in the Assembly, the number of members on each committee, and other details are addressed in the respective rules of the Assembly and Senate, and most bills go through two committees in each house of the legislature, a policy committee and a fiscal committee. How are bills processed in the California legislature? In the committees of the legislature, the general practice is to work out language changes prior to the hearing so that hearings are only a brief debate on the merits of the bill between proponents and opponents and nominal discussion by committees, followed by a vote to either pass or defeat the bill. This is often due to the time limits of committee hearings and the sheer volume of bills that they must consider and act upon. How are bills processed in the U.S. Congress? In congressional committees, their hearings are called markup sessions because the committee members actually debate and amend or mark up legislation in their committees rather than just debate the measures. Congressional committees engage in lengthy committee hearings to actually debate specific language changes to propose federal legislation. And this process of amending bills is open and part of the public hearing process. Finally, what does productivity look like in the legislative branch of government? The two bodies, the federal and state legislative branches, can be compared with data. For example, there were 12,300 bills and resolutions introduced in the 112th Congress, but only 238 measures, or basically 2%, became law. At the federal level, rarely do more than about 5% of the bills introduced in a session actually become law. On the other hand, in California, there are usually about 4,500 bills introduced during the 2 year session, and usually between 1,800 and 2,000 bills are signed into law. So that is more than 1/3 of the bills that are introduced in the California legislature are actually enacted into law.